For a while, I've been slowly transitioning my room from a random hodgepodge of hand-me-down items to a more curated collection of vintage-looking items. And that includes my jewelry and makeup collection, which is currently all stored in cheap plastic bins. So whenever I go to the thrift store, I'm always on the hunt for cute little trinket boxes, especially if they're hand-carved or old-looking, and especially if they're of a reasonable price. And while I do like it when things look old and decrepit, some of the boxes I got were a little too disheveled to be holding my wares. And so for this video, I thought it'd be nice to fancy them up. Hi, my name is Emily, and I'm an amateur restorer. The first box I got was this very ornate treasure chest, which I got for $2. It has a beautiful lock and lid detail and riveted hardware holding all the corners together. I don't actually know what these are called, so feel free to let me know. While the lid has some discoloration, I opted to keep it like that because, again, I like it when things look old and decrepit, and also because I wasn't sure I even knew how to fix it. The real trouble was the interior of the box. The blue velvet was not only absolutely filthy, it also appeared poorly applied. The lid piece doesn't even have the right dimensions. It made me wonder if this lining was even original to the construction, and also a piece of the lid had fallen off. Some more issues include the lock missing its internal mechanism and upper latch, and the hinges being slightly crooked, but I left those alone. The plan was, once again, to take inspiration from my hexagonal jewelry box and line the inside of the box with red velvet and a nice threaded trim. To start, I began removing the blue velvet, which was increasingly feeling like it was cheap vinyl from the dollar store. As I removed it, however, I discovered even more trouble. The velvet was hiding a sheet of broken glass that had already begun to splinter and crumble. I later noticed one of the rivets on the lid had been replaced with a nail, and it was safe to assume whoever had put it in had accidentally broken the glass and subsequently hid it behind the lining. Once I safely removed the velvet, I cleaned up the remaining glass and wondered what purpose it was supposed to serve. There wasn't any mirror behind it, just a layer of glue or paint. But taking inspiration from this, I decided I would put a mirror in the lid. After all the glass was out, I also removed some splinters of wood and then moved ahead to tearing out the velvet from the rest of the box. This revealed some pencil markings on the bottom, which was very cool to see. It also dislodged another piece of wood, although I couldn't figure out what this one was supposed to do, as there were no other pieces like it in the box. Here's a closer look at the markings on the bottom, which I find absolutely fascinating. The original plans, maybe? I commissioned my sister in imaginary money to help me cut out a mirror for the lid, but first I had to figure out the issue of the nail. Since I didn't have any rivets to replace it with, I just cut out a thin piece of sandalwood and drilled a hole where the nail would go so I could even out the area and prevent the protruding nail from damaging the mirror. While gluing it down, I also fit the loose piece of wood back in. I received a professionally cut mirror sometime later and glued it in. To line the interior, I cut out some cardboard to the right dimensions so I could cover them in velvet. I glued the cardboard down onto the fabric, careful not to let the glue seep through, let that dry, and then placed them into the box. Next, for the threaded trim, I braided together some embroidery floss, sealed the ends, and set about carefully gluing it into the box. I also decided to line the mirror, but since the box was slightly crooked, there was a big gap in one corner that I wanted to fill first. For this, I cut up a bit of that mystery wood and fitted it in before trimming the mirror. Before I give the mirror a good peel though, let's meet our next contestant. Admittedly, the next box isn't vintage looking at all. It's actually a very cheap looking mass-produced box. It's giving dollar store chic. But it was $150 at the thrift store, and I got it as a backup for my vampire box with the plan to turn it into a beautifully polished piece with a red velvet interior because it does have a nice little inlaid stripe. Unfortunately, I did not succeed, but the experience taught me some valuable lessons. Number 1, sanding is important. I didn't use anything above 220 grit for this box because I thought it felt smooth enough, but that was a mistake because, number 2, the finishing wax did not turn the wood lustrous and shiny. Instead, the wax seemed to stick in the minuscule crevices of the lightly sanded surface and left behind ghastly white streaks. Some surfaces did gain some luster, but nowhere near as shiny as I hoped, no matter how much I buffed and polished. Number 3, I should have used a dark stain. Remember how I wanted my vampire box to be dark and gritty like walnut? That's what I should have done for this box to give it some depth and fanciness. But all I used was a basic natural color wood stain that didn't make the box look any less cheap. So I gave up on this box, and eventually I'll probably use this hardware for something else. With that, let's take a look at our third contestant. The third and last box of this video is hand-carved, elegant, and floral themed, and I got it for $3.49, which in fact rounds up to $3.50 because Canada stopped producing pennies in 2013. Happy 10-year anniversary to that! The box was very dusty with a lot of fluff trapped in the carvings, and the bottom had a small crack which I quickly repaired with some wood glue and clamps. The biggest problem with the box was with its function. It was incredibly hard to open and will require both your hands at a decent amount of strength to pry apart. This is because the inner lip was a little tall, which caught and strained against the lid. This also caused tension in the hinges, and I could feel that the screws holding them in place were already becoming loose from the sheer force alone. As with the first box, the interior left a little something to be desired. The indigo velvet was very worn down and dirty. The finish on the box was also quite patchy and dull, so I wanted to apply finishing wax to it to give it a nice sheen. Easy step first, I scrubbed out the collected dust with an old toothbrush. While doing this, I discovered that the box had some rough patches, which I knew from the previous box meant I would have to sand them well if I wanted a sleek finish from the wax. And so, sanding. Lots and lots of sanding. Here I am, outdoors, with my box. This is gonna be very fun. Not. Here you can see me handling the broader work first, filing down the lip with a rough grit paper. Although the initial plan was to file the entire thing down by about a 1/4 inch, I discovered that the real problem was with the front corners, which clearly jutted out too far from the lid opening, so I focused my sanding efforts there. You can see the velvet still in the box, and in hindsight I should have removed them before this step, but hey, I'm learning. Anyway, I also sanded the rest of the interior, which was a lot rougher than the exterior, using finer and finer grits until I got to 3000. I also gave the bottom a good sanding since it was also quite rough, but left everything else for later since I'll be handling the box quite a bit. See how much smoother it closes now? I gave the box a good vacuum and wipe down, and now I'm removing the velvet lining. Although I suppose calling it velvet isn't quite right because it was really just a very thin and pilled up fabric. It was sandwiched between the bottom and the sides of the box, which meant I had to use a cutter to slice it out instead of tearing it out cleanly. This left a huge mess behind from frayed fabric running all around the edges and purple fuzz sticking to the wood. I cleaned it up with tweezers and alcohol as best as I could. This wasn't strictly necessary since I'll be applying a new lining later, but some part of me just wanted a clean base to work off of. I mentioned earlier that the hinges were loose. Unfortunately, the hinges were nailed in, so it wasn't as simple as tightening a screw. I had to turn to more unorthodox methods. But it worked, so. With all the sanding done, oops, that's the French side, I livened up the box with a good rubbing of finishing wax. I'll spare you most of the buffing footage as well, but from my experience with the previous box, I also learned to wax very thinly as to avoid those atrocious white streaks. That was also a good lesson to learn before I waxed my vampire box. I did still get some streaking on this box, but they were all mild enough to be wiped down easily. And it was inevitable that some wax got caught in the carvings, so I picked them out with this lipstick sampler I got at Sephora years ago. It's been about an hour and now I'm going to buff this out. You can already see the difference in shininess. Eventually, I remembered that I had a ring light on my tripod, and you can really see how shiny the box is once I turned it on. Here, I'm showing you how easy and smooth it was to open the box now. I could even do it with one hand, which was a major upgrade. Instead of velvet, I decided to line the box with felt for no real reason other than the fact I wanted to try it. It's not this vibrant in real life. I think the cameras just try to compensate for it. And so I did exactly that, cutting the felt out to size, making sure it fit, and then applying a thin layer of glue. I'm gonna let this dry overnight, and tomorrow when I'm less EPDP, I'll decide if I want to put lining on these sides as well. Before I went to sleep, however, I decided to look up some blue jewelry box interiors for inspiration, and that was when I saw... This is not the exact same as my box. What the heck? This item is unavailable. Like this one too? This one looks like my box but smaller. What currency is this? Like even look at the flower on top. Okay, so somebody's out there making this kind of box. And I don't know who it is. 1970s. Is that true? How do I find out? Look at this. My box has so many siblings. Bone inlaid, mother of pearl. What is it? What are you? See, this does look exactly the same as my box. So somebody removed the beige thing before donating it to the thrift store. As far as I could figure, this kind of box was called a shisham box, and the style I had was typically made in India, though mine had no stamp or tag to indicate if it was authentic or not. I also remembered that sometime after I bought my box, I had come across a very, very similar box at the exact same thrift store, although this one was smaller and also somehow $2 more expensive. The next day, I went in search of lace and trim, and if you thought I had just one drawer of this stuff, yeah. Okay, so I've dug up a variety of laces and stuff. The original plan was to lay this across the edge like so, something like that, so that it is reminiscent of the original box inside. The problem I have with this lace is just that it looks so manufactured. It doesn't match the rustic hand-carved vibe of the box. I also have this big bag of random trim, and this blue one actually caught my attention. Look how pretty it is. The ribbon is obviously manufactured as well, but it looks so much more fancy and ornate than just the machine spun lace. And I know that I did wax the inside, but the problem is there are exposed nails in there, so that's not very aesthetically pleasing. And also on this other side, line of scratches all along the bottom. I know when you look at it this way you won't see it, but I just would prefer if it was covered. There's only a thin layer of wax on there. I think adhering things to it won't be a problem. Also, confession, I've been using wood glue for these projects because I thought I didn't have any white glue at home, but it turns out I do. So, time to start using this and stop wasting my more expensive wood glue. And so, I began the process of lining the box with the blue ribbon. I trimmed it to size, glued down the edges to prevent fraying, and whipped out my baby clamps to hold the glued bits in place. I know this is overkill, but I just really wanted my baby clamps to make their debut. I cut out some felt, glued that in place, once again remembered my tripod has a ring light, glued some more, and then finally went in with the ribbon, clamping them in place to ensure a good bond. I repeated the ribbon process with the lid, and damn it, you know what I just realized? I can't close this anymore if I put fabric on the inside. And so, with great disappointment, I peeled it all off. Thankfully, this was pretty easy since it was just white glue. Off screen, I wiped off the glue residue with a damp towel. I didn't want to waste this ribbon though, so I instead used it to trim the lid like this, so it doesn't interfere with the closing mechanism. And with that, it is time for the final reveal. Alright, it's time for a quick wrap up. I feel like I don't really have much to say in terms of gathering my thoughts. I'm just really happy with how pristine and beautiful it looks, if you could look past my cat for a second. Every time I open this and see the beautiful glossy mirror shining back, it just makes me so satisfied. And of course, I really like the combo of colors I chose for the embroidery floss. I also really like how smooth the entire box is. I can move it around without hearing a snag on the carpet or anything. And of course, being able to open it easily is a huge upgrade. The inside is so pretty now that I did not finish this sentence, yes, but what I was trying to say is that I really love how whimsical and pretty it looks. The only thing I would mention is I probably shouldn't have used felt for this, but I didn't have any blue velvet, so it had to do. But yes, that is it for this video. Learned a lot for sure, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye bye!